It actually manifested in a very strange way, believe it or not. And I ended up going in a deep rabbit hole of disordered eating and body dysmorphia. You know, like I've always loved fitness, and I could not, like I kept going to the gym and getting all these nutrition specialists and health coaches to get rid of this belly. And I'm small, like I'm petite, you know, I'm not heavy, but I had this little pooch, and I'm like, I am not keeping this, you know, like I'm spending too much time in the gym and too much time focused on my eating. And I just spiraled in a way that I had never imagined before, and was so afraid that if I was desperate to not be the mom that let herself go.
I'm Megan Armstrong. Welcome to Life 6 Feet Above. 6 Feet Above was created when I started to share my story of spending 16 years wanting to be 6 feet under, to now living a life full and happy 6 feet above. The more that I started to talk about my journey, my struggles, and my past, the more I realized people were genuinely interested and not judgmental at all, which is what I'd feared for so long. In fact, other people wanted to talk about their story as well, and for some reason they trusted me to do so. So the 6 Feet Above podcast is my way of helping to share other people's stories, finding out what works for them to create a life of happiness. Before we start this episode, I want to let you know it has some explicit language and some very serious subject matter. It may be triggering or sensitive to certain people. Please listen with discretion. This is Allison's story. So episode 18, I am so honored and incredibly excited to be joined by Allison Hare, who actually interviewed me on her podcast a couple months ago, and the tables are turned. So welcome to the 6 Feet Above podcast.
I'm in the hot seat.
You are. I can sit back and relax this time.
We'll see.
So Allison and I met a few months ago through a mutual friend, actually, through Lillian. And we kind of hit it off. And again, another person that I didn't meet in fitness. I feel like every one I've met, pretty much 90% of my guests have been in fitness, but you were not. You were just a mutual friend. And we really hit it off.
I actually did meet you in fitness.
Oh, God, years ago.
You just didn't know.
I didn't know it.
I was just in your classes.
In my classes forever ago. So, Allison, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for work, and then what you are doing with your podcasting career.
Oh my goodness. How much time do you have? All right. I promise I'll make it super quick. So I am by day, I'm a sales professional. I work for Salesforce. I'm in technology sales, and have been doing in sales for 20 years.
Okay.
And about a little over a year ago, I had this feeling that I had some messages that I needed to get out, and just felt that itching where I was just kind of watching Real Housewives too much and saying, you know what, there's got to be a little more. Like, I think there's some more good I can do in this world. And so I started a podcast, and I loved it so much. I have a degree in broadcasting that people would always ask me, well, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. Where do I even start?
Yeah.
So I started teaching people how to podcast, and then launched a blog, and, trying to figure out all of it in the rest of it.
Right.
So I also think that I'm going to be starting a podcast network.
Really?
Yeah. So it's called Uncommon People Podcast Network, the Up Network.
I love this.
Yeah. So trying to kind of get, I don't know, I just have been addicted to people who are using their voice in a way of sharing their message. And so I've been addicted to helping people find their own voice.
Yeah.
Just like I did, of just feeling like I had more to give, but didn't know where to do it. And so I love
empowering them.
Being that catalyst to help somebody.
And that's kind of where our relationship developed is, my first season, I had producers and editors, and I really wanted to learn how to do it, at least learn the production process. And I joined your 6-week course, and it was amazing. And then COVID hit, and then I felt like I was just scrambling to survive. And I remember telling you, I'm like, I feel like such a failure because I don't feel like I can put anything out right now. I'm not ready to start season 2. And you told me, you're like, you'll start it when you're ready. And I did. And it was like, it was several months after I thought I would, but it was what I needed to hear to be like, okay, even though I waited 6 months between season 1 and season 2, it doesn't matter. Like, people are still there. They're still going to listen. And, you know, you teaching me kind of the ins and outs of, you know, how to approach season 2 a little bit differently was super beneficial. And you actually just interviewed me on a follow-up. And I remember telling you, season 1 was, what do I want? Right? What do I, why am I doing this? Why am I doing the podcast? And after kind of reflecting and going through COVID and quarantine and all the stuff that has happened this year, I finally came to the realization that this podcast is not for me to host. I am just facilitating other people's stories, and it's a way for me to serve the world.
That's a huge shift. But I, you know, when you talked about that, I was thinking about how much of a maturity that happens when it shifts from you, you know, because you get the benefits anyway of just being able to kind of offer somebody a platform to share their story. But I was really touched by how I am glad that you honored your own body, you know, to say, I need a minute here, you know, and there were a lot of expectations through COVID, through being in quarantine of, okay, I've got to do something huge, or, you know, I need to sit on this couch and it be okay.
Right.
You know,
and for me, I was just in like survival mode. I lost, you know, I'm only part-time employed and I lost half of that job. And it was just like, okay, how am I going to pay my mortgage and all the things? And I couldn't put my focus on a podcast surrounding mental health when I was very much in kind of a dark space for a while. But I look at myself and I'm like, 10 years ago, I would have pushed through and powered through and faked it. And now I at least know myself so well that I was able to take a step back. But during this time of COVID, you kind of took the opportunity to rebrand your podcast, rebrand your, so what do you call, so you've got your podcast, but you've also got your coaching podcasting brand, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about those two and what the difference is.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Culture Changers. So I talk to people and interview people whose work breaks convention and changes how the rest of us live.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, there are two parts or two objectives with it. One is to really be able to have an audience look at something in a new way. So it's like perspective shifting. But every single episode has actionable item, actionable, you know, something actionable for them to make their own mark.
Like a takeaway.
Yeah. So whether it's practical takeaways or some kind of guidance, or even just feeling so moved by that story, by what that person is doing, to say, I can do that too.
Right.
And so the podcast program is called Press Play Podcast. And so it's a collaborative, interactive 6-week coaching program. And it's designed to do, you know, kind of take it to the next level of those people that are saying, you know, I feel like I have more to give.
Yeah.
And I have things that are important to me, passions, whether they're passions or skills that they're not being able to use, or even just conversations. You know, for me, I felt like I'm very multi-passionate, and there are some things that I'm really find very, very important to me, but I didn't want to just focus on just one area.
Right.
And to me, that was crippling of just, well, where do I go? I don't know what direction to go. And this allowed me to kind of take those passions and let them run wild, you know?
Yeah.
I think everyone's got their own little crazy in them, you know?
If you're not weird, you're weird. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not a little bit strange and off, like, if you're too normal, there's something going on.
Exactly. You know? And so I think it allows me to kind of dive into something that I'm so passionate about and just let it run wild, and then be able to interview people who are experts in those fields or have been making changes or making difference in that field. And even for me, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a mom of 2, I'm a wife. like we're in the midst of a global pandemic. There's
Right.
so many issues with healthcare and with education. And I get to interview people who are changing the status quo of all those things and ask them the questions, like the meaning of life questions.
Right, right.
So for me, it's incredibly gratifying to be able to feel like I'm not such a freak for being so passionate or intense about certain topics and be able to explore that.
How incredibly timely too, right? Culture changers. Like you really are kind of at the forefront of our culture completely shifting and being able to express those stories in real time.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, this is what happened in history and you're interviewing something. No, you're interviewing people that are doing it right now, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Really cool. And how often do you release episodes?
Every week.
Every week?
Yeah.
Just like me. But your Press Play podcast was really cool. And I came from 11 episodes of season 1. So for me, I think I had a different perspective going into it than some of your other students. And would you say that you take anyone from, hey, I just have an idea, to someone like me that's, done 10, 11 episodes already? Are you kind of open, or do you have like different levels?
No, I think at this point, I probably will add advanced, courses, that kind of thing, advanced podcasting courses. But I think the benefit of having, people who have no concepts at all. When I decided I wanted a podcast, I had zero idea. Yeah. In fact, that's not true. I had like 20,000 different ideas, and I didn't want to pick just one lane. Yeah. And so it really is anybody from concept to launch. And I think in your case, it was most people don't take the path that you took, Megan. In terms of podcasting, most people don't, shell out a bunch of money and, have somebody produce it. Yeah. You are fortunate in that way to kind of have that help, but then you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm a little hamstrung here.
Right.
I'm a little crippled here.
It's only going to last for so long. Yeah. And I had some free time on my hands last year. So there's that.
It all worked out.
Where are you from originally?
I'm from New Jersey.
Okay.
Yes.
The Jers.
The dirty Jers.
The dirty Jers. How'd you end up in Atlanta?
My two of my brothers moved down here, and two of my best friends from New Jersey, we all came and visited. And that was like back in the Buckhead days. I don't think you lived here then, but the Buckhead days where it was like bananas.
Party Central.
Party Central.
My cousin was here when I remember these stories.
It was insane. And so we went down there for one weekend and we're like, what are we doing in New Jersey? And we all packed up and moved.
That's amazing. How old were you when you moved here?
25.
Wow.
25. Okay. So I've been here for 20 years.
Well, you went to college for broadcasting.
In New Jersey,
In New Jersey.
Yes.
And then what was your life like growing up in New Jersey? Parents were married, brothers and sisters?
They were married for a while.
They were. Okay.
My mom and dad, I'm one of 7 children.
Wow.
7 children. And it was interesting because my father had a daughter from a previous marriage. Okay. And then my mom and dad got together and they had boy, 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 girl, girl, girl. And I was the first of the girls. So it was bedlam. Like our home was just...
insanity.
It was insanity. I called the child abuse hotline on my brother. I swear to God.
They're like, no, this isn't the sibling abuse
hotline. It was just nuts.
Okay, so what did your parents do?
So my father was an importer and exporter. So he had multiple businesses. My mother did not work. And it's very interesting because it is a common thread through my whole life that my mother, my mom and dad were married for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And my mom was this incredible cook and she somehow raised 6 of us. Jeez. And my father traveled around the world for work. So she was she was a disciplinarian. She did everything. And then, my father's businesses kind of tanked and everything just went to hell, really. And I was a teenager. A lot of us were teenagers in that time. And my mom had to go back to work and she didn't finish college. She ended up marrying my father. Right. And so after 25 years, she's like, okay, I need to go back to work. and, still have dinner on the table and all of that stuff. And my father is from Lebanon. So he has this kind of cultural expectation of, women cooking. And
right. Having everything prepared and ready to go.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's my dad thing or a cultural thing. I think it might be a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And my mother would always tell me, Allison, never rely on a man for money. Never rely on a man. You make your own. You find a great man, but you make your own.
Right.
And so my ambition and my drive was born very, very early. You go to college, you finish college, all the things that my mom didn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think she had a lot of regret or resentment, or was she just really trying to encourage you and empower you?
I don't know about resentment. At that time they were going through a divorce. So it was acrimonious for a while. And, now my parents are on great terms. They're close, they live 5 minutes from each other. But it was hard, so my mom was dealing with her own depression and this massive change in being a single mom of 6, you know what I mean? Gosh. And my father is, leaving the country. And it was really challenging. But those formative years, I can't not credit, like this insatiable drive to do something powerful and to do something important in this life was definitely born from my mother and that experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how old were you when they were going through the divorce and you saw your mom's depression and that sort of thing?
I was probably around 15, 16, 17. It was hard because I didn't understand why my mother couldn't get out of bed, And so I think even having an understanding now of people who suffer from depression, it's not that my mom's lazy.
Right.
It's not that my mom can't get out of bed.
Right.
Like she physically can and so couldn't. And so I was kind of experiencing that firsthand and, trying to go off to college and, do all those things. And I remember she had me in art therapy. I feel like my mom was kind of progressive for the time, like she put me in art therapy.
That's like a big thing right now.
Right.
So this is like however many years later, right?
But even as a mother now and thinking back to my mom of just trying whatever she could to make sure we were going to be okay, even throughout all of this trauma and all of this, upheaval.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause her life was flipped upside down, basically. And someone that, and I'm not sure about your mom, but I think there are people that are more susceptible to depression and something triggers it in their life. And whether it's some sort of genetic component and then it's triggered by a situational component or whatever it is, some people are just going to at some point go through mental health issues and depression. And some people never experience it ever, and good for them. But it's got to be really hard at 15 and 16. So that's about the time that I was diagnosed, to see your mom going through that, because I remember me going through it and not understanding it. Like literally, like why can't I control my thoughts? Why am I having these absurd thoughts of killing myself and not being able to get out of bed and losing all of this weight? Like I didn't understand it, but that's because no one talked about it.
Yes.
Right. It was such a taboo sort of thing and a shameful sort of thing that, if people had been talking about it, it wouldn't be so embarrassing. And a 15 or 16-year-old would actually understand. And once we are able to understand ourselves and other people, we are able to help them.
Yes.
But until we can do that, there's nothing we can really do because we don't know how to help. Right. So did any of those feelings of depression rub off of you or rub onto you at your teenage years? Or did your struggle kind of start later in life?
I would say it probably started later in life. I will say that there was a period, and especially in middle school, where I always felt like I felt things more intensely. And I was very thoughtful, like I was really interested in psychology and understanding what's underneath it. And I don't know that I suffered from depression ever really, but I think that it took a different form later on in life.
Okay.
And a lot of it does stem from the family, the familial kind of stuff, and really happened after 40, after having kids.
Really?
Or just kind of spun out in different ways, you know? I wonder, and you probably have a better understanding of this, but I feel like some people experience depression in a way where it's crippling, where you can't get out of bed, where you feel sad, you feel like you don't matter, you feel like nothing matters. Mm-hmm. You just rather be not here.
Oh, it's such a physical, it can be a physical experience for sure.
But I wonder if some people experience it where it is the exact opposite, where you have to go to not feel anything.
So that's interesting, because I'd say from about 15 to about 31, I really struggled with several different things. And at first it was depression, and then it kind of morphed into bipolar. And along the way, at first I was anorexic when I was 15 and 16, and then that turned into bulimia in my 20s. So I think originally it started with the debilitating factor, where I couldn't get out of bed and I couldn't do certain things. And it very much somewhere along the way, whatever label you want to put on it, it morphed to no one had any idea, because I had this like game face, poker face on, where everything was great. My life was good. And that's when I would go home and binge eat and be on the floor physically shaking and crying and not knowing what to do and how to control my thoughts. So it was like it was like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, which enter bipolar. The days would be okay because I was so busy, especially when I lived in LA. I mean, I was driving from house to house doing private swim lessons. I was training at a gym. I was lifeguarding. I was doing all of the things from the outside that looked so good, and like, oh, you're 25 and you're on the beach with a life, literally I was that girl in a red lifeguard suit. Right. And I would go home and I was beside myself. So I think it comes in different forms and at different stages of our lives. So, and knock on wood, I've been in my 30s now for several years. And I have to say there are bouts of depressing moments, but I used to have years of depression, and then it would be months and weeks, and now it's like days. So for me, it's just been this regression, I guess, on timing. But I am also very hyper aware of when things happen in my life, how to make sure I stay mentally healthy and mentally well. So if you've never had to deal with that and something happens in your 40s, it's the first time dealing with it. It's like me dealing with it at 15 or 16. So you had kids into your 40s. Yep. And what happened that kind of jolted your health, your mental clarity and your experience with it?
Yeah, I got married at 37 and we found out we were pregnant on our honeymoon. And so I had our, first baby at 38. And with my son, I was with and the reason why I mention this, because I feel so passionate about childbirth. Yeah. Especially in America, because I think what's happening now is people are starting to realize that the C-section rate is so unbelievably high. And for me, I was pressured into a C-section. And what I found out later is that it was unnecessary.
By your doctor or who?
Yeah. So, and it's common practice, and
because you're older, or why?
So in my case, I had too much amniotic fluid. Okay. And so they said, well, what we recommend, I went to perinatologists and they said, you're, 38, you have too much amniotic fluid. There is a risk of uterine rupture. Okay. And we recommend, and this is my, first time I'm pregnant, and it was an easy pregnancy and it was good. And they suggested I get induced 2 weeks early. So at 38 weeks. So what I didn't realize is that if you were induced prior to it, you're 3 times more likely to have a C-section in the US. And so I got induced. They broke my water. I was 5 centimeters dilated 5 hours later. So everything was good. And then 3 hours after that, it was like 8 o'clock at night. they checked again and I was still 5 centimeters dilated, and they started hitting the panic button and said, well, you can have a C-section. And I'm like, I don't want a C-section. Like everything in my birth plan says, unless death is imminent, I don't want a C-section. Right. And they're like, well, okay, you could wait, but we may not be here. We might do a shift change. And I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, what does that matter?
Okay.
Next shift should be just fine to take care of me.
But I'd been with the practice for 12 years. Right. And then they said, well, I said, but what's the risk? And so at this point, I'm like getting sick. I'm throwing up. I have so many drugs in me from the epidural, from the, Pitocin, from everything, and was so ill because they kept kind of pushing it. And they're like, there's a surgical room available now. You could wait, but it's right around Christmas and, there may not be rooms later.
Right.
And then I'm like, what is going on? And then, but I didn't really understand the risks. And they, I said, well, what is the risk? And they said, well, you could wait. Or, the risk is that you risk infection because the water was broken.
Okay.
And what I didn't realize is that the risk is really 96 hours after the water breaks. So, yeah, I think and so I ended up having a C-section. My son was in the NICU for 9 days because of it. And I think he was just undercooked. His lungs were not fully developed.
Right.
And I didn't get to hold him for 2 days. It was just like a wacky time. And he was, he never latched, so I could never breastfeed him. So I ended up pumping for 8.5 months. And it just was a bummer. Right. And so
it wasn't what you had wanted. Right? It wasn't what you had expected.
Even if it wasn't, so I understand C-sections are necessary, in some cases. In this case, when I found out I was pregnant with my second, I did IVF with my daughter.
Okay.
So we had a whole thing to get to that point, and I was 40 years old, and I had a uterine fibroid, which was blocking my ability to get pregnant after my first. And so I had that removed. And so I had greater risk. So IVF, I had additional incisions in my belly, and then a C-section before. And so when I had was pregnant with my second, I really wanted a different experience. And I ended up, this is a flywheel story too.
Oh, jeez.
I ended up trying to figure out, like my doctor's like, I was like, what, could I have a natural childbirth? And they're like, we do not support that here.
Because don't they say once you have one C-section, you probably will have another one?
Yes.
For the second?
That is general practice.
Okay.
It is not by ACOG, which is like the medical, Bible of this. But that is the medical practice that doctors are not treated. They're not taught how to do vaginal birth after cesarean.
I see.
There are 2 doctors in Atlanta that openly do and are trained for that. And my friend Isabel Dupree, who you may know.
Yeah, I know that name.
Yeah, so she's a good friend of mine. She was pregnant at the same time. And she basically told me, Allison, you don't have to have a C-section. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so she started sending me all of this data and all of these articles about options. And I'm like, what do I do? Am I putting myself and my baby in danger? And I remember I went to 4 different doctors, and 4 doctors told me I absolutely had to have another cesarean. And one doctor told me, you don't have to. And I'm like, what do you mean?
I was like, wait, what?
And so this particular doctor, his name is Dr. Boots Taylor in Atlanta. He looked at my medical records. He's like, I'm looking at where the incisions are. Your body can stand the trial of labor if you want. And I was like, well, do I need a C-section or not? And he's like, do you want one? And I'm like, what kind of doctor is this? I don't know what's happening. And he said, I know it's hard to believe, I know you're probably not used to a doctor not just telling you what you need, you know, but in this practice, we believe in shared decision making. So if you want to have a cesarean section, we'll support that. If you decide you want a natural childbirth and change your mind, we'll support it. You know, if you want epidural, we'll support it.
Right.
But and we're going to monitor you closely because you do have higher risk.
Sure.
If I tell you need a C-section, you need one. Until then, it's your choice.
Right.
And I remember being at Flywheel at 6 a.m. with Isabel. We're both pregnant. And I'm like, God, am I making the right decision? And, you know, she had a natural childbirth. And she said, you know, having natural childbirth was the most empowering thing I've ever done. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I don't know. They're just things that I've done in life where I don't know that I would have had the courage, but going through that, you know, kind of really fueled me. And I remember that Flywheel class. I was so fucking pissed that was taken away from me.
Did you get your highest power score in that Flywheel
exactly
class?
Right.
Did you get one of the t-shirts?
No, I'm always second to last. I'm never dead last. I'm always second to last in Flywheel and leaderboard. I'm slow, but I was so mad, you know, and so that fueled my whole pregnancy. So I ended up having a med-free natural childbirth at 41 weeks gestation at 40 years old. At 40 years old.
Wow.
And everything was different. Everything was so amazing and so supported and so different. And the reason why I share that is because I felt like the C-section, being pressured into a C-section the way that it was. And again, if I needed one, I get that, you know, but I had the same exact conditions. I had too much amniotic fluid, even with the second one, you know, and it was monitored very closely, but the panic button was not hit in the same way. They said, okay, here are your options. And, you know, if you have the choice until you don't.
Right.
And it just felt so empowering, but I felt like my voice was taken away with the C-section.
Yeah.
I felt like it was taken away. And I remember feeling like, I felt like I don't know if what I do matters anymore. It was really weird because I've always been a confident person.
Right.
And I felt different as a mother. I felt different. Like, did the ambition, not the ambition go away, but am I who I thought I was?
It's almost like they stole it from you.
Right? It felt like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to play a victim, but it got to the point where afterwards, going through my second child, I decided I wanted to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I thought of this idea. It was called Birthright Connects. And I was going to develop an app where people could crowdsource their experience with doctors in childbirth. So if you were pregnant, Megan, you can look up your doctor and see what their C-section rate is because people could crowdsource what it is like.
Right.
And it's kind of like Real Self, which is like the plastic surgery app. If you're looking for a procedure, it's kind of like that for childbirth. So if you're pregnant and you say, I keep failing my glucose test, you can go and ask experts, in the maternal health field and get it. So I had this whole thing. I was so passionate about it. And it turned out the technology and the money were just
too much,
outrageous. And I was just way in over my head trying to figure out, how do I bring this to life? But it was kind of planting the seeds for, how do I make an impact?
Right.
How do I make a difference? Because this is not right. And there's so many people that are, pressured into a C-section, but because it's so normalized, they don't understand that they're dealing with postpartum depression after pregnancy. They're dealing with, really feeling lost after childbirth because they're not supported. I think in America, in very many cases, not all, obviously this is not a blanket statement, but again, like the C-section rate in the US is 31%.
Wow.
And 30 years ago, it was 10%. And I can't imagine
what's changed so
women's
much?
bodies have changed so much. It's just a practice.
And I would imagine, and granted, I've never been, I've never given birth or had a child, but I would imagine that there's some, not only the feeling of having something taken from you, but also maybe a feeling of failure, because it's like, as a woman, that's what we're supposed to do, right? Like, look at your mom. She had 6 kids. You have kids. We produce kids. We put them through our canals and birth them. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. So when a doctor comes to you and says, no, you can't do that, it's almost like, did I mess up? What did I do wrong in these past 9 months, or whatever the feeling might be? But, trying to understand that maybe it's just more of an issue with the medical side than us as women. We can take the power back, right? Or ask, like, you know what? I know it's been this long, but I'm going to go see another doctor, or whatever it is.
Yes.
Being able to actually take control of your life. And it's not playing the victim. It's simply saying, this is what happened to me. And you're only playing the victim if you let it affect you for years and years and years and years and years, right? And harbor that anger or that reason, whatever it is that you had. So after you had your second child, looking back, you're like, wait, I was able to do this with the second one. Why wasn't I able to do it with the first? Did it create that sense of anger? And did you hold on to that? And what did you do about it?
It actually manifested in a very strange way, believe it or not. And I ended up going in a deep rabbit hole of disordered eating and body dysmorphia. Like I've always loved fitness, and I could not, like, I kept going to the gym and getting all these nutrition specialists and health coaches to get rid of this belly. And I'm small, like I'm petite, I'm not heavy, but I had this little pooch, and I'm like, I'm not keeping this, like I'm spending too much time in the gym and too much time focused on my eating. And I just spiraled in a way that I had never imagined before, and was so afraid that if I was desperate to not be the mom that let herself go. And I felt like I had to look fabulous and dress a certain way and to look a certain way and be able to wear the same clothes that I wore before babies. I did not want to be the mom that let herself go. And it was, it got so bad where I would go to therapists and they would make it worse. Like I'm asking for help, and it just felt crazy, because I, similar to what you were saying of like, why can't I get out of bed? Why can't I, why don't I feel better? For me, I felt like this is helping nobody. So I'm completely obsessed. I can't stop obsessing over my body. I've got a husband who loves me. I have kids that are amazing. But I'm sitting here worried about my body, and this is where all my attention and focus is. And so I'd be so angry with myself for stuff that doesn't matter. And I knew it didn't matter, and I could feel myself going crazy. And I remember I had some girlfriends, my CrossFit friends, and my girlfriends, we get together, and I remember panicking because we were going to go to somebody's house and have dinner over there. And at this point I was prepping food, and I remember going to a therapist session right before it. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I want to bring my own food, and I'm afraid if I eat a chip, I'll eat all the chips, like it was just this. And I'm like, I'm watching myself like
spinning, get
a grip, woman, but I remember just kind of, I'm sitting it there, and they're looking at me like, Allison, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? And it was just hard. And
this is at 40 years old, right?
41. Yeah, 41.
41, which I think therein lies your story. And there's a point in every interview that I do that I'm like, this is the story. And sometimes I don't know exactly where it's going to happen for me when I realize, okay, this is what people are going to take away from your story. Like what you're doing now, everything that you're doing for the culture. I mean, that's amazing. But for all intents purposes, this is where your life, I think, really changed. And
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're not because when we think body dysmorphia and eating disorders, we think teenagers,
right,
and 20-year-olds, right? We don't think 40-year-old women who look like they have got it all together. You've got the job, you've got the career, you've got the husband, you've got the 2 healthy kids. Like, it can happen to people that look like they've got it all together.
Yeah.
And whatever triggered it, I would imagine there's some underlying, thing from your past, from your childhood, that it's always there, that it was always there on the surface or right below the surface. And this was the catalyst that kind of launched you into this, completely, and I say crazy because I feel like I can say that because I've been there, this crazy sort of thinking.
That's how it felt.
Right?
Yeah, it felt
right?
it nuts.
So how did you take control of that? How did you work your way through it? Or maybe you're still dealing with it now. I never know.
You will not believe.
Shock therapy?
No. No, but I might have opted. I might have paid for that at that point.
At some point in my life, I'm like, I don't care. Do whatever you need to do to me. Fix me.
So the craziest thing happened. And you're not going to believe this. So I went to a tarot reading. Do you know who Kelly Knight is?
No.
Kelly. Oh, you need to know Kelly Knight.
I want her to do my tarot reading.
Yeah, she's amazing. So she owns the Modern Mystic shop in Ponce City Market.
I've heard of it.
It's like this wildly successful metaphysical shop in Ponce City Market. But before she was there, she was in Paris on Ponce, and she was doing tarot readings. So I'd been friends with her for 10 years, like kind of Facebook friends, and she was talking about tarot readings. And at that time, I decided to get a reading, and I was really focused on my job. And I'm like, I'm not really happy in my career. I feel like I need to be doing more. What should I do? So she's pulling these cards. And she immediately went to the food. And she immediately went to some like childhood stuff of just like familial stuff. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And so I was telling her about this, and she asked one question that unwound everything for me. Like, to this point, I'd been to therapists, I'd been to psychics, I'd been to anybody I could throw money at to fix this problem.
Baton Bob.
If I could find Baton Bob, I would employ him.
I want to get him on the show. Side note.
Yes,
That'd be cool.
That'd
be cool.
He's on Instagram. I just finally found him. I was wondering where he was during COVID, if he was like bringing joy to people. But so she asked me one question, and she said, what if you took, and this is not, I don't even know if it just happened to be in a tarot reading. It was kind of an obvious question, but she said, what if you took all this time that you spend waking up at 4:30 in the morning and, going to the gym and prepping food and all this stuff that you don't like to do? What if you just replaced it with something that felt really nourishing, like a walk on the Beltline or taking yoga instead of lifting heavy weights? What would that feel like? And that one question unraveled everything. And so I stopped going to the gym and I started doing yoga, and I started going on walks every morning, and felt like I could feel the lightness in my body. And I felt, I was so nervous. I felt like I was always one donut away from being morbidly obese, I mean, in my head.
Yeah,
and so I'm like, what if I stop making, prepping this food? And I weighed everything that I put in my mouth, like everything was to the ounce. And it just was nuts. And I just started to unravel and no longer feel the weight of that anymore.
And did you like weigh yourself daily? Like yourself? I know you weighed your food.
It's all been in a cycle, like you hear weighing yourself is bad. So I would stop weighing myself and, and that would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that, and I wonder if it comes from, when we see therapists and doctors, it almost feels like so clinical and judgy and trying to really like get into your psyche versus this friend of yours, where it was more of a suggestion, just like, hey, what if, like, versus like, do this or take this medication or whatever, where it's like more suggestive and actually gives you an opportunity to try something versus feeling like you're just being diagnosed.
Yeah, that's a thoughtful assumption. I know that I did go to one therapist, and on the very first time I went to him, he said, "How do you feel about medication?" Like it was before I said anything.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, I don't want that. And he's like, well, let me explain to you about beta blockers. And, you know, and every time I sat down there and I'm like, am I really crazy? Because I feel like I just need somebody to talk to. You know, how do I do like the cognitive behavior? What is it?
Cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah. Like that seems right. And he's not a psychiatrist. So he would say, I don't have any, you know, ability to prescribe anything, but how do you feel about it? And I just felt like it was the wrong match, you know?
And I think this is good for people to hear, especially women. You know, for me, the frustration lied in, especially as a teenager, and my parents were just trying to fix me.
Yes.
It's like, this doctor I didn't jive with, this one wanted to do this. It was like doctor after doctor after doctor. It was so exhausting.
Yeah.
And I feel like as an adult, you know, someone in their 30s and 40s, like being a little bit more mature about it and being able to say like, hey, it is a process, but keep pursuing different people. And don't just stick with one, you know, therapist because your friend recommended it or because you think that they're going to fix you. Like, go to somebody or do something or do whatever it is that helps you. Like, we have to take our physical fitness and our mental health and all of it into what works best for us. Just like I look at it like physical fitness. Like, there are certain workouts that don't work for me, you know, and certain workouts that I do that don't work for somebody else, or trainers. You know, you may not drive with a trainer and it's okay. Move on to the next trainer. But you have to be willing to take the responsibility and do the work, which is a lot easier said than done.
Yeah. So here's my thought on that. I feel like, and maybe the common theme here as we're talking is advocating for yourself.
Yes.
You know, like I end up going to a bunch of healers after that.
Right.
Like my home is
Right.
full of crystals
Right.
that I don't know that they have the same potency.
Well, who gives a shit if it works for
Right.
you?
Exactly.
Right?
I don't know. You know, like I don't really pray to candles or
Right.
anything like
Right.
that. But you know, but it really, really made me feel good at that time. So even advocating for myself as a patient, you know, I think there's the dichotomy of feeling like, you know, this doesn't feel right. This does feel right. The no, yes feeling in your body. Right.
Yes.
But then there's the other part of, you know, there are times when in my life where I've felt so broken that I didn't trust my judgment.
Yeah.
Like I got myself here. So I need an expert to help get me out.
Absolutely.
And that's the balance that I think we have to find.
It's the fine line. And it's, I think my driving purpose behind this show is getting people of all walks of life that have been through all different things. Everyone's got their own story, even if it's not, they don't think it's traumatic. We all have a story. We've all been through shit.
Yeah.
There's no one that's going to get out of this life, you know, without any sort of trauma. However, I think the point is that there is not a one size fits all.
Right.
And I want people to, whether they've dealt with an eating disorder or depression or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you deal with a feeling and an emotion, right? Grief is grief, pain is pain, whether you're 2 or you're 92, a painful feeling is pain. It doesn't matter what caused it. What I want to know is how people deal with it, handle it. You know, I say happiness is a habit. All this stuff is habitual. And whether it's hard to break that habit and create a new one, that is our responsibility.
But I wonder about, okay, so I've had questions about you. So I'll put you on the spot.
We're going to turn the tables.
Well, you know, like when you were kind of writing your thing about being happy, like is happiness really the desired state? Because happiness is so fleeting, you know? So it's put on this pedestal.
Sure.
You should always feel this way. But I think the real skill is coping.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like we are not taught how to cope anymore. I feel like we're taught how to take a pill, how to forget about it, how to, you know, whatever it is, drink it down, whatever. And I think that is the detriment to our society of not being able to deal with really hard stuff.
Yeah.
Than to just, you know, kind of put your arms out and say, bring it on.
Right. And that's absolutely a fair and factual statement. It's providing tangible information hey, this worked for me. I saw a bunch of therapists and I finally saw a tarot card reader, so maybe somebody goes and tries something kind of quote unquote wacky, right? Outside of the box that they might have judged someone else for, but now they're hearing that it worked for you and they're going to do it. So giving really tangible information and experiences for people that might be feeling the same way and not knowing where to turn and where to go, or maybe they can't afford a therapist or whatever it is. So no, I don't think, I guess for me, when I say happiness is a habit, is I look at my life big picture, and I spent, so many years just being really unhappy that my parents would always say, what do you want? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to be happy. Like, I knew I was so unhappy that was the opposite of it. And now looking back, it's very much to the point where if I can get up and look in the mirror and say, I like my life, that's what it is. For me, it's like a contentment, and being able to handle the things that are thrown my way. And last year I went through a lot of traumatic stuff. Yeah. And I thought, 2019 was bad. And then 2020 came along. And I was like, well, Jesus.
It laughed at 2019 in the face.
Exactly. But for me, I'm so incredibly proud of myself and happy with myself that I know that I can handle it.
But what if it's that? What if it's just feeling like you have the tools yourself?
Yeah.
And maybe that's happiness. Maybe that's like the coping skills.
Absolutely.
Instead of feeling helpless or hopeless.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's different for different people. Like what makes, somebody happy might just be the things that they have and can afford to buy. For me, that's not it. For me, it's being able to cope and be able to handle getting fired and losing an income and health insurance and all of the things, breaking 2 bones, all of those things. Like, now I know that I am so much stronger than I was 20 years ago, that I can handle it. And I know that it's not the end. There's going to be hard things down the road. But now I have the skills to handle it. So you having the skills to kind of take control of your life and look back. How are you, several years later, right? Are you still dealing
Not so
with
many
it?
Years.
What, 6?
No, it's I'm 45.
5 years later.
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years later. You're like, don't age me. But I'm thinking of your daughter. I guess that's where I'm going with this. Is how do we, the opportunity, and I talked to my friend Brandon Chubb a couple weeks ago. He's a Black NFL player. The opportunity is with the next generation and not perpetuating this onto them, and realizing like we have to take control as adults first before we can teach our kids what to do. And it's not so much changing the older generation, it's us empowering the next generation and actually giving them skills and tools to take responsibility of their own lives. So how are you dealing with it now? And B, not only for your daughter, but your son, right? These types of things can be projected on them.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is when I was 29, before I had kids, before I had a husband, before I had a boyfriend, before I had anything, I took a Toastmasters class. I was in Toastmasters, and one of my speeches, I love Toastmasters. And one of the speeches, so you're required to write a speech, and there are different kind of topics or formats of a speech. And one of them I wrote was called How to Be Indispensable in a Disposable World. And the answer for me is and the way that I write is like, I'll have an idea or a tagline and I just start writing, and then it starts filling into be, like something that could be profound, I guess. Right. But in my case, it was legacy. Of how do you leave a lasting effort? And so how do you leave a lasting mark on what you do now? And so since I was 29, that has driven me of, am I leaving a good enough legacy? And when I talk to my kids, it's funny that you mentioned my daughter, because my daughter is 5 and she is super strong. Like she does not care what people think about her. She just is, she's amazing, right? She's so fun to watch. My son is 7 and he's much more sensitive. He really feel like he doesn't need to be the most popular kid. Yeah. but he needs to feel like he belongs somewhere. Otherwise, he's kind of all over the place. So it's interesting when he comes home and says, they wouldn't let me play with them, or they took my book bag, or they, were making fun of me because I'm little, because he's small. And I have to sit there and just let him feel it.
Yeah.
And not tell them like, well, they're idiots or they're jealous, like things like my mom would tell me, like they're jealous. Yeah. They're not jealous of the zit feast.
Right.
Right. Buck teeth girl. And I have to sit with it. And so for my son, I tell him, Danny, my job is not to make this better for you. My job is to help you make this better for you. And I have to like constantly reframe him. And it's so hard to not try and fix it.
Yeah.
And just continuously tell him, you have to learn how to cope. Like people are going to be mean.
Right.
And it's for a variety of different reasons.
Right.
And you have to figure it out. And it's really hard.
Because if parents constantly fix their kids, they never learn how to do it themselves. And then they grow up and go to college and they're 20 and 22 and 24 and they're going through real life stuff. They don't know how to deal.
Yeah.
So it starts young. And I think kids are so intuitive and they are so much smarter than parents give them credit for. And I feel like I can say this because I started teaching swim lessons when I was 17 and I've always worked with children.
Yeah.
And they get it. Like they get it so much more than adults get it. And if we can kind of help mold them while the cement is still wet, right? And really give them the tools, that they will be more likely to handle this stuff at a later age, at a later state.
That's my hope. And I think what's interesting is I got this weird sense the night I found out I was pregnant with my son. We were on our honeymoon in Ireland and I was up all night and all I thought about was, please God, let this child be capable. Let this child feel capable. And I don't know why that was the word that kept coming for me of just let him feel, I didn't even know it was a hymn. Let this child feel capable. And that is true for my son. My son is not an athletic kid. He's not like a normal, he's a normal kid, he's healthy, but he doesn't, he doesn't want to participate in competitive stuff.
Right.
And neither did I or his dad, so, we understand that, but we also don't want to push him into, trying to fit in when all he needs is to fit in with the people he cares about, one or two people, and he's good.
Do you think there's some anxiety? Like does he struggle a little bit with anxiety?
I think there might be a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there might be a little bit. There's some times where he just has these, I guess they're panic attacks, like I might yell at him for something and he's like hyperventilating and I'm like, Danny, just pick up your toys, and I have to like sit with him and just say, okay, Danny, just breathe. Breathe. It's okay. You can do this. You can do this.
Are you telling the story about the dinner? Right? Didn't you cook like chili or something and he didn't want the tomatoes and you're like, just eat the freaking tomatoes.
Yes. And, I have to really be conscious about how I deal with him because he's different from me, you know? He's different. Like I'm more like, get your shit together,
right?
And my son is not, he's got to process things in his own way and I'm doing my best to honor who he is.
It's kind of that empathetic spirit. And again, going back to not fixing someone, but understanding them.
Yeah.
And really having that sense of compassion and grace and realizing not everyone deals with things like you or I do. Cause I'm very much the same way. I'm more of a tough love, should have got off the pot because that's how I was raised.
Yes.
However, going through all the things that I've been through in my life, I think I can relate to people of all walks and people that deal with emotions differently because like I was saying, like different stages of my life, I was handling things very differently. So I feel like I just have that sort of empathetic spirit to understand people and be like, well, this is why they do this. Not that it's right or wrong, especially this, the stuff going on with race in our society right now with these 50 and 6-year-old white men. It's like, they were raised to learn that white privilege is the way of life, right? So being able to kind of compartmentalize that and knowing that, okay, we can't teach our children this anymore. Right. So
it's an evolution,
Totally,
parenting is an evolution too. But I think about some of our leaders, thought leaders, people that we really look up to, like Oprah Winfrey is like the crown jewel of it all.
Right.
Of understanding empathy and really understanding things you probably wouldn't have been faced with before, a new perspective. And then I think of Brene Brown. So Brene Brown introduces vulnerability to the culture and changes. And then evolving from that is Glennon Doyle and her book Untamed, where it's, yes, vulnerability, but now it's like celebrating your inner spirit.
Right.
And letting it be okay that you don't have to be this outgoing, gregarious, perfect person that has to fit in a box of just, societal's expectations, but to untame your wild and celebrate that, even if it is shyness.
Right.
Or, somebody that feels things really deeply.
And your son will contribute to society in a different way than maybe many.
Probably my daughter.
Right. So again, it's about finding, what works for you and what opportunities in life that you can succeed at. And not everyone is going to deal with it the same way. So back to kind of you and your story, does the body dysmorphia, do you ever fear you're going to go back there?
Sort of. So, I ended up having a mommy makeover.
Okay.
And it was horribly botched. And I had 3 surgeries to fix it.
Really?
And my body is, there's scar tissue.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scar tissue where I can't really wear a normal bikini, and I have to wear things a certain way so that it's not showing.
Yeah.
Like the scar tissue is a big bump.
Yeah.
And I think about, should I go fix it again? And I'm like, I can't go down that rabbit hole. So I'm almost resistant. I'm resistant to diets. I'm resistant to restrictive eating.
Yeah.
And so I'm more of the mind of more intuitive eating.
Yeah.
And I just house chocolate all day too. Like dark chocolate is kind of like my kryptonite, but
it's healthy.
I'm kind of okay with it. Like I've somehow let it go that it's okay if I put on some pounds.
Right. Right.
I don't want to. And there are times when I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I can't go down that road.
Yeah. I'm the same way.
Are you?
Yeah. Oh God. I think about my weight and I'm a bigger human being, but I think about that all the time. Especially with the field that I work in, outside of this, the fitness field. But I also realize, I'd rather be at this weight and be able to look at myself in the mirror and be like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for the day, or go to bed. And I reflect. There's a reason I do a lot of Instagram stories. I watch my stories every night and I'm like, today was a good day. That's probably why I do so many of them. I don't do it for everyone else. I do it for me. I'm like,
I love that.
What did I do today? And 10 to 15 years ago, I was a good 25 pounds lighter, but, I'd fit into a different size of clothes and I was doing photo shoots and, it didn't fulfill me. So I would much rather be this physically and mentally than that. So that's what kind of drives me and just staying healthy and realizing I want to grow into an 80 to 90-year-old body that's healthy and strong. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, that's why people should work out, so that they can be physically fit and be around for their family for long periods of time versus fitting into a size, 4 pair of pants. I think for me, it's, like there are certain triggers that I'm like, I'm not going to go down that hole. Yep. And there are times when I look, and I think it's more even the aging, like I have Botox and fillers in my, they're line items in my budget, and I get my hair done every 4 weeks, and it's such an expensive process. I think it takes so long.
Yeah. I think the body, I'm okay with. I think it's more the aging part that I'm really actively fighting.
Interesting.
And, again at 45, and I think it's funny because I just got certified to teach Rebel dance fitness, and so exciting. I have no background in dance and really no business dancing, but to me it's like the old bald guy that gets a Corvette. Right. To me, I feel like the dance class is like, why not?
Yeah.
Why would I limit myself if something I feel brings me so much joy?
Yeah.
Why not just go down the path of joy? Right. And that's kind of been my North Star of what brings me joy. And again, what goes back to Kelly Knight and the tarot reading of, why don't you do something that's nourishing for you?
Yes.
And movement feels really, really good to me. Trying to feel sexy feels really good to me because I don't generally look at myself and go, yeah, that's a hot mom. That's a MILF. That's not how I view myself, but I'm just like, well, what if I just act, do things that are going to just feel really good for me. Yeah. And if I keep doing more of what lights me up, then that's all I can ask for.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest difference between being me in your late 30s, you in your 40s versus in our 20s. Like I did things because I wanted to fit a certain mold. Yeah. And now I do things because it makes me feel good, and call it selfish or whatever. But at the end of the day, like I always say, you come into this world alone, you're going out of this world alone.
But I don't think that's selfish. I think it's, like conforming to society's expectations, despite like being a sociopath or something, But I think to me, if I'm continually chasing what makes me feel joy and pure joy, not like a manufactured, like a drug joy.
Right.
Then that is what I want my kids to learn. That's the legacy. The example that I can lead is how do you empower yourselves to just be who you are and celebrate that, and go towards joy.
Absolutely. Well, I celebrate you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you came into my life. And I'm so glad to hear that, I think when we are vibrating, and I might get a little frou-frou for a second, but when you start vibrating at a certain frequency where you feel joy, you also exude joy and light. And I think you and I are both moving on that path, which is a really cool path. And when you start to do that as a human being, you start to attract the same human beings on that path, and you just level up together. So I'm incredibly grateful that you came into my life, and incredibly grateful that you shared my story on your podcast, and are allowing me to do the same. And I think the more that we do this as a culture, it starts with individuals, and it starts with parents leading the way for their kids, and really creating this sense of, call it happiness, joy, whatever you want, just a feel good emotion, physically, spiritually, mentally, like all of it together. Like that is the point of life for me.
I agree. But I think the other aspect of what stops people is giving themselves permission to feel that way. Yeah. And I struggle with that. Like, do I deserve to feel this good? Or feeling like the other shoe's going to drop. So I'm glad that you have this platform, because I feel like it's important for people to feel permission to share their stories.
Yes.
And that their stories matter.
Yeah.
And that their experiences matter and their feelings matter.
Absolutely.
And so I honor you for doing that for other people and for me in the seat today.
Well, thank you. How can we find you?
You can find me at AllisonHare.com. Okay. My podcast is Culture Changers Podcast. So you can go on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever platform, you will find it. And then on Instagram, I'm Allison, ALLISON _ Hare, like the rabbit, HARE.
Don't forget 2 L's in Allison.
2 L's and an I.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on 6 Feet Above. I am so grateful you're in my life.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the 6 Feet Above podcast. I'm your host, Megan Armstrong. Subscribe so you never miss another episode, as a new episode is released every Tuesday. And if you're enjoying the series, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Follow the show on Instagram at 6 Feet Above Podcast to keep the conversation going, and feel free to reach out to me directly at Megstagram11. This episode is a product of Audiographies, produced by Megan Armstrong and Denor Sepolia, edited by Jacob Smolian, and the music is by Keenan Willis. Funded by yours truly. I'll see you next time.